varied journey. After Mervyn Hughes came Norman Ridley, Jimmy Aitken, Pete Nichols, followed by Chris Johnson, a guest from the Royal Navy, Robin Wilkinson, and then Shaw Close and Doc Jones. Lastly, John Sims carried his grip out of the plane, showing that he wasn't going to give way to any Oriental luxury. The great annual festival of Masherbrum then delayed the party. Drummers stirred up the enthusiasm of the spectators in the crowded streets, while two sword dancers went through their intricate routine without spilling much blood. Masherbrum celebrates the death of the martyr Hussein, son of Ali and grandson of Muhammad, in the Battle of Karbala, and 1 million or so spend the day on the streets. The temperature was well over 100 degrees in the shade, and refreshment stalls were popular. Magnificent cardboard replicas of Hussein's tomb, made by various communities, were carried through the city. Bands of men and youths joined in the procession, beating themselves with steel wires. Although some had dyed their clothes, there was plenty of genuine blood, and many went to hospital afterwards. But in the old days, some of the fanatics beat themselves to death. The local courtesans were enthusiastic supporters and passed by on camel carts. It was by following one of these that members of the expedition got out of the crowd, among comments which could be imagined, if not understood. Some say that Hussein and his relatives died of thirst in a siege, and for this reason the Tatsias, as the tomb replicas are called, must be cast into water. Everyone delighted in destroying works of art which had taken many days to make. But some small boys were seen sneaking home with their Tatsias still intact. After 2 days of Masherbrum, all was clear for the journey north. The assistance of the Pakistan Air Force saved the expedition thousands of pounds, and was only one of the many forms of assistance provided in their country. The expedition took off in 2 Bristol freighters, travelling via Chaklala to Skadu, capital of Baltistan. From Chaklala, near Rawalpindi, the flight lay over the foothills of the Himalayas, with the aircraft Tony Smythe came out first, to be greeted by Squadron Leader Shah Khan, uncle of the Mir of Hunza and senior liaison officer to the expedition. Members of the party followed, all delighted to be in the cool mountain air at 8,000 feet above sea level. The Skadu rest house was delightfully situated several hundred feet above the Indus, and had been the starting place of many big expeditions. Here the party unpacked its stores for the first time since home, and set about engaging half a dozen high-altitude porters, who would stay with them for 7 weeks. Every high-altitude porter had to be equipped with boots, clothes, rucksacks, and all the equipment of a climber. Ridley and Wilkinson worked throughout the day, their packing lists telling them in which of the 88 boxes each article was packed. At dawn on the 29th of June, Sims, Nichols and Bottomer, with a small band of porters, started out, hoping to be a good 3 days ahead of the main body before they reached Hushe village. From Skardu, their route followed the Indus and then the Shyok to Khapalu, where they crossed into the Hushe Valley. They were to have a good look at K6 and at several of the upper valleys, including the Aling, before making a decision on where the expedition was to climb. When the main party reached Gol at the end of a 20-mile march, they found 100 patients waiting to see the doctor. Most were cases of dysentery, worms and sore eyes. Such surgeries were normal, and the expedition had foreseen them and brought large stores of medicine. On the first stage, packs were stored in the rest house, but thereafter they were left with the pony wallahs without loss. Wherever streams permitted irrigation, barley fields and apricot orchards grew, with villages sited to look after them. In between, there were larger stretches of desert, where the heat was intolerable at midday in spite of the high altitude. Halts had to be carefully planned where fodder was available for the 56 ponies. After 4 days' march, totaling 65 miles, the main body reached Khapalu, where the Shyok River had to be crossed. Aitken as cashier paid off the pony wallahs, and everyone was sorry to lose them. At Khapalu too, the Raja paid the expedition a visit, and gave much help in organizing the crossing. In Central Asia, where the rivers are wide and fast-flowing, with water coming straight down from the glaciers, the goatskin raft has been used ever since the dawn of history. No other method has yet been found to replace it. About 20 skins are blown up by mouth, assembled on a frame of poles, and carried to the bank. Each raft supported a crew of 4, plus 2 passengers, and about 300 pounds of freight, and drifted a mile downstream in each crossing. Mirza Beg set sail over the icy water where a spill would have been very serious for all on board. The raft was carried upstream for the return journey, and topped up with air for a new cycle of operations, each of which took an hour and a half to complete. A mixed cargo, including the Raja's horse, was brought back, the horse suing the river as though it was quite used to this procedure. Although 6 rafts were working for the expedition, it took about 8 hours for the climbers, high-altitude porters, and loads to cross a mile of river. Last to cross were Shah Khan and Jimmy Aitken, who had supervised loading on the Khapalu side. They were anxious to avoid getting their feet wet, but got them wet nevertheless. The tracks to the north of the Shyok were not suitable for pack ponies to use, so 136 porters had to be assembled. They raised a cloud of dust as they moved off from the first night's halt, in the light of the rising sun. In the Hushe Valley, the river falls steeply enough for the water to be drawn from it to irrigate a continuous band of crops and trees. On an average, 1 or 2 expeditions pass this way every year, and at each village the population turns out in force. At Brale Gone, the campsite lay under the apricot trees. Up the Hushe, the valley got steadily steeper and narrower. At length, a view over open barley fields allowed a superb vista of Masherbrum. This mountain had been attempted many times, and had recently been climbed by the American-Pakistani expedition of 1960. The R.A.F. expedition had thought it might climb the 24,000-foot peak of K6, now seen to the east. But after inspection, it was decided to concentrate on the Aling Valley, since this was hitherto unexplored. Beyond Hushe village, the river splits up into a number of tributaries, of which the Aling is the most westerly. The tracks up it, as far as the glacier snout, are rough, but quite passable for heavily laden porters. Once the base camp has been chosen, the main body of porters, reduced to about 80 as loads of food had been left on the way for the return journey, were paid off. Further progress lay on the steep glacier ice, for which boots were necessary. The expedition must now rely on themselves and the dozen or so high-altitude porters. At the base camp, all tents were put up, to be moved forward as they were needed elsewhere. From here, an advance base would be built up when the climbing objectives had been chosen. From the glacier snout into base camp, to the foot of the furthest mountains of the Aling Glacier, was only about a dozen miles, but all except the first 2 or 3 were untrodden by the foot of man. Immediately behind the base, at 12,000 feet above sea level, towered the Aling Glacier snout. In its caverns, the Aling River rose. Each hour, several tons of ice would drop into the river as it started its 2,000-mile journey to the sea. When crossing crevassed glaciers in small numbers, every precaution has to be taken to ensure safety. A climber must therefore know how to use prusik knots to climb up his own rope. Under Sims's instruction, all members practiced this. Flight Lieutenant Beg of the Pakistan Air Force trudged out among vertical ice walls on the glacier. The method is slow, but many hundreds of lives have been saved by its use. Shah Khan, veteran of Rakaposhi, showed his experience in cutting steps on the glacier above camp. After various reconnaissances, especially to Green Mountain, an advanced base was set up at the confluence of 3 upper glaciers at about 15,000 feet. From here, 2 peaks, Scepter and Mitre, could be reached from a glacier camp at about 17,500 feet. The heavily loaded party picked their way carefully among the crevasses, between which millions of tons of mountain debris were scattered. Often steps had to be cut in the ice to enable the climbers to avoid some obstacle. The aluminium ladders were taken in case such problems should be met higher up, where it would be impossible to go round. In and out of the crevasses the party wound its way, always keeping an eye open for a mountain which would be both interesting and within its powers to climb. At length the party, accompanied by Shah Khan's dog, arrived at the site chosen for the advanced base camp. The tents stood on a ridge commanding a wide view. Prominent is the hoop tent, designed and made specially for the expedition under the guidance of Ridley. This provides considerably greater floor space for the same surface area. Beyond the upper glacier could be seen the first 2 objectives, which we called Mitre and Scepter, for obvious reasons. Above 16,000 feet, the permanent slow line was reached, with all the advantages and disadvantages of glacier snow. Most movement therefore took place very early or very late, to avoid sinking into the surface, softened by the sun. At this height too, the shortage of oxygen was beginning to be felt, as this was early in the expedition, when everyone was still unacclimatized. The next camp lay in the middle of a wide snowfield. It was cold at night, but the afternoon temperature in the tents was above 100 degrees. Leaving camp at 3 a.m., Tony Smythe and Chris Johnson attempted to climb Scepter by the west face, but bad snow forced them to attempt the east ridge from the Mitre Scepter Col instead, late as it was. The rock outcrops of the east ridge made the snow less likely to avalanche than on the slopes to the west. The climbers kept to the ridge itself wherever possible, but occasionally they were forced by overhanging cornices to take a lower route. Another party exploring the route up Mitre paused to watch from the col. Smythe and Johnson moved carefully on snow just below the ridge. The summit was reached after 500 feet of bare rock of grade 4. From the top, the climbers admired the superb view of Masherbrum, only 5 miles away. The weather was far too warm for this height, and this meant that bad weather was approaching, and the snow might avalanche. But by keeping to rock whenever possible, the pair got down safely, reaching camp at 11 a.m. They were met by those in residence and escorted to the tents for a welcome drink and meal. The expedition had attained its first summit. The afternoon was spent in resting, but the party also made ready for the ascent of Mitre on the next day. Ridley, Shah Khan and Doc Jones, followed by Smythe and Johnson, reached the summit in enjoyable conditions. With 2 peaks of 19,000 feet climbed, it was the turn of Sims and his party for a summit. They set out from advanced base to provision 2 higher camps with the object of climbing a mountain they called Hunchback. As its name implies, Hunchback was a rounded mound of snow, very different from the rock peak of Scepter, or even the ice pinnacle of Mitre. In good weather, it would have been an easy mountain, but the monsoon had now arrived, bringing very changeable conditions. At their first camp, Sims, Wilkinson and Bottomer changed from their normal boots to the special American high-altitude boots. They spent a very frustrating time in the southwest Aling and were desperately keen to reach the summit of some worthy mountain. Not far above the camp, the glacier came to an end at a snow col, beyond which the ground fell to the mammoth ice systems of the northern Karakorum. The weather for Hunchback turned foul, amounting almost to whiteout, when sky and snow emerged into one featureless haze. The expedition aimed not only to climb mountains, but also to survey them. From a survey station on Green Mountain, a grassy peak of 16,000 feet just above the base camp, the surveyors could see most of the big mountains, especially Chogolisa, the K6. Saeed Shah spent long hours at work on his plane table, using simple instruments which produced an immediate result. It was by methods such as these that the whole Himalayan range was originally surveyed. Special porters were employed by the survey team to carry and set up their equipment. The apparatus used by the R.A.F. members of the expedition was lent by the Royal Geographical Society. It was accurate and very complicated, needing much work after the return to England. Jimmy Aitken used a theodolite with camera on top. Thus, he recorded a view or panorama which would otherwise have had to be drawn on a plane table. The task of the survey party in climbing the steep and crumbling hillsides with this valuable equipment was far from easy. So that survey stations could be mutually visible, large and conspicuous cairns were built, topped with rolls of fluorescent paper. Mervyn Hughes spent much time calculating the heights of various camps and mountains climbed. In camp, Hughes and Addis sorted readings and films. Each roll of film had to have its reference number and to be packed with great care in case it should fall into a river on the return journey. Sometimes a climbing party would visit a valley which would prove worth a later visit by surveyors. Surplus food would then be left to avoid unnecessary porterage. In the Narmar Valley, Sahib Shah reached such a dump to find that the local bears had been there before him. Bags and tins had been ripped to pieces. Of the bears themselves there was, perhaps fortunately, no other sign. The Narmar camp, with its deep carpet of edelweiss, lay at the foot of vertical cliffs a mile high. It was cool and airy, with flowers of every sort. By now, most of the climbers were back at base for a rest, and Wilkinson was busy with the expedition scissors. A big event was the arrival of the mail runner from Khapalu. In addition to mail, he usually brought presents and messages from village headmen on the way. Tony Smythe was by now suffering from toothache, and Doc Jones decided to pull the tooth out. He'd already been practicing on some of the locals. The expedition was now drawing to a close, but there seemed time for one further major ascent, and a likely mountain of 21,000 feet lay at the very end of the northwest Aling Glacier. As this peak was climbed on a Sunday, the name Atwa was chosen, since that means Sunday in Urdu. Led by Ridley, with Nichols, Addis and Johnson, supported by Doc Jones, the party set out up the totally unexplored northwest glacier. A dull day among the moraines led them to the site of Camp 4. The camp was ideally situated with pools of fresh water on either side of it. Fresh water is unusually hard to get in the Karakorum, since the glacier streams are full of mica, while fuel is too scarce to allow much melting of snow. A slight but steady snowfall went on throughout the next day, so the weariness of the porters was given as an excuse for a general rest. Meanwhile, Nichols and Johnson cut steps up the glacier to be used later. On the following day, everyone moved up the glacier with full loads to Camp 5, situated at about 19,000. Now reached the ridge and could see their way to the summit, although this was usually obscured from them by cloud or snow plume. Ridley and Addis led alternately, their crampons moving slowly at over 21,000 feet. Much of the way, the climbers had carried a light tent, which they had left on the ridge for Nichols and Johnson, and the second pair spent the night in it, reaching the summit independently the next day. With a feeling of great relief, Addis reached the top. and gazed down at the magnificent view. But before relaxing, he made sure that Ridley was safe, and then the two of them were able to take a short rest after their exertion. On every side, peaks, great and small, stretched to the far horizons, including the mighty K2, second mountain in the world, which was not far away to the north. The Karakorums are the greatest group of peaks on Earth, surpassing even the Everest area. 2 by 2, the tired climbers came down to Camp 5. No sooner had Nichols and Johnson reached safety when Ridley and Addis moved down to Camp 4. It was already midday, and the snow was so soft that they sank in at every step. Great care was necessary, since a fall into a crevasse was a strong possibility. Packing up camps as they went, Ridley and his party got back to base in the highest spirits. After 6 weeks away from civilization, all were ready for a little comfort. By now, the track between the main camps had been turned into a high road, and even Hussein the cook boy had been up to advanced base. As leader, Tony Smythe could look back on the expedition with a sense of achievement. At the mess tent, the climbers took their ease and spent a restful day, while preparations for the journey homeward were made by everybody else. Sims packed his tent with more than his usual thoroughness, for tents were not to be used on the return journey. The headman of Hushe, Ali, turned up to make arrangements for 56 porters required for carrying to the Shyok. When the porters arrived from the valley, they were presented with all the unwanted food and clothing. They suggested a party and a dance, and great preparation was made to make it a memorable occasion. Stocks of chapatis were made by the cooks, using the simple method of pressing a flour and water paste into hot pans, and many unfortunate hens perished for the feast. The Baltis are always ready for a dance, and undoubtedly rank very high as virtuoso. With the rhythmic clapping of hands and beating of drums, the celebrations carried on far into the night.